This is how we got to now, guys. This is how we get to the Capitol besieged by authoritarian fascists, like a fascist uprising. And, I think in a lot of ways it was a terrorist attack. And there's an interesting, there's an interesting discussion going on the left that we shouldn't use the term terrorism about what happened. Even though, I showed you the picture of the guy with zip ties who was hoping to tie up members of Congress. What do you think would happen if they got their hands on somebody like Ilhan Omar, who has been the target of vicious, racist, bigoted attacks for years, right? And again, from just garden variety Republicans will repeat the bullshit, lie, disgusting smear that she married her brother to get citizenship, all of that disgusting, hateful rhetoric, right? What do you think those guys who we saw screaming and smashing and stuff would have done to her if they got their hands on her? What would they have done to AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or Rashida Tlaib, another Muslim representative? What do you think they would have done? I shudder to think. And not only is there a reticence to call this terrorism, but there is a reticence to call this a coup, an attempted coup. Because, they were really dumb and they didn't do it. Because they weren't successful. It wasn't a coup. This is a particularly embarrassing, story in BuzzFeed. The pro-Trump mob was doing it for the gram. Like, it was nothing more than a social media blitz, right? We just want to look cool on the gram, guys. Like, whoa, selfie. See, look at this guy taking a selfie. Hey, look at me. It's, I won't go too deep into the story. I really like, if you're on Twitter, guys, follow Southpaw, NYC Southpaw. He said they placed pipe bombs at the DNC and RNC. Forgot to mention that earlier. There's just so much. One man made it to the House chamber carrying zip ties suitable for binding hostages. They cornered a New York Times photographer, angrily pushed her over and broke her lenses. They beat a policeman to death with a fire extinguisher. There were also multiple people stopped who had guns on Capitol Hill, a long rifle, and a guy with a bunch of Molotov cocktails. So they were ready to commit terrorist violent acts. Some of them did. They bludgeoned a police officer to death, okay? But what's his argument? Well, but it was like a dumb coup. Like they weren't successful, and they were, they just like milled around, and just put their feet up on Nancy Pelosi's chair. Guys, I don't understand the need to downplay fascism and fascist. From the beginning, I, as a journalist, recognized the attacks on journalism from Trump, that these were illustrative of a very dark, disturbing thing, of a authoritarian streak in the right in America, and especially in the far right, that was part of fascism. That was part of Hitler's rise to power. I think we're beyond the point of breaking Godwin's law now, where you can't bring up Hitler in an argument. And I actually want to get to something interesting to do with that in a minute, but you got to know your history, guys. You got to study fascism. If you want to understand fascism, you got to study it. And the Nazis didn't just take power out of the blue nowhere in the 30s. Before that, they attempted a coup in the 20s. It's known as the Beer Hall Putsch, whatever how you pronounce it. Also known as the Munich Putsch. It was a failed coup d'etat by the Nazi Party, leader Adolf Hitler, in Munich in November of 1923, November 8th and 9th, during the Weimar Republic. Approximately 2,000 Nazis marched on the Felderum Hall in the city center, but were confronted by the police. It resulted in the deaths of 16 Nazi Party members and 4 police officers. Okay. Hey, my wife's in the stream. Hey, baby. Thank you for the kind words. So this was called the Beer Hall Putsch. They killed police and several Nazis were killed. Hitler was later jailed. and he spent time in jail. That's where he wrote Mein Kampf. Trump is still acting like he's going to run again in 2024, and we have these followers of his who staged an attempted coup on the United States government. We have to be clear that that's what this is, guys. And just because they were stupid and idiotic and, posted on Instagram doesn't mean it's any less dangerous. Another thing we can learn from the study of fascism is there was a psychologist and she was a Holocaust survivor. She fled Germany. She's Jewish. Her name was Hannah Arendt, and she reported on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who led one of the most bloody, disgusting factories of murder, a concentration camp in Germany. I can't remember if it was Buchwald or which one it was. But she came up with this idea. Here it is on Wikipedia. Arendt's book introduced the expression and concept of the banality of evil. Her thesis is that Eichmann was actually not a fanatic or a sociopath, but instead an extremely average and mundane person who relied on cliched defenses rather than thinking for himself, was motivated by professional promotion rather than ideology, and believed in success, which he considered the chief standard of, quote, good society. Banality in this sense does not mean that Eichmann's actions were in any way ordinary or even that there was a potential Eichmann in all of us, but that his actions were motivated by a sort of complacency, which was wholly unexceptional. Many mid-20th century pundits were favorable to the concept. So this need that people have to dismiss what happened on Wednesday as, it's just not a big deal, and they were just they didn't know what to do because they didn't get anybody. Guys, people were asleep on the fascist threat from Trump and his followers for years. I paid a professional price for talking about it as a journalist, as noticing all the warning signs. Historians were ignored. They were pushed out and ostracized. Anytime anybody brought up a comparison to Hitler, it was just, oh God, you can't call. And now Nazis invaded the U.S. Capitol, waving Nazi flags, waving the Confederate flag, swastika tattoos and all. There were, sweaters, Holocaust. These aren't Holocaust deniers. These are Holocaust celebrators. There are, followers in QAnon and other stuff that are, saying stuff like, 6 million wasn't enough. So it looks like I have a church spammer in the chat. I'm going to put him on a timeout. Jay Coleman, Horkheimer and Adorno escaped Hitler to the U.S. and wrote about what they saw in American corporate culture mimicked what they had just fled. Jesus. I mean, and that's another thing about these people, because a lot of, I'm sorry, but completely naive, silly people on the left online are trying to say, well, this is why we needed to have those $2,000 checks. And this is why we need, even force the vote people, gag me, are getting involved, talking about this. Like, oh, maybe we could have got the $2,000 checks or Medicare for all if we just teamed up with these people. Guys, these people are not who you think they are. They're not your friend. Tucker Carlson is not your friend to, collaborate with on. Okay? This is fascism. They are not they're not gonna help you. They're not gonna be your friend. The other thing was, and this is the Republican Party. There have been multiple Nazis to run as Republicans over the years, but this was a representative, incoming congresswoman.
To be here, thank you, Kim.
Oh boy, I can't hear her.
Women.
Can you guys hear this person?
I want to our country great that they represent.
Well, that's a bummer. I don't know. Maybe Twitter. So the bummer was she said in her speech, Hitler was right about one thing, that the youth are the future. You must control the youth. So she's literally saying Hitler's right about such and such. These are the people we're dealing with. Okay, they're not going to be your ally. They're not going to help you. They hung up a noose in front of the Capitol building. If you've ever heard of the Turner Diaries, it's this white supremacist novel that boasts and pines for what they call the Day of the Rope. The Day of the Rope, where they're literally going to hang the race traitors. If you didn't know, Oklahoma City bombing architect Timothy McVeigh was reading the Turner Diaries. Columbine shooters were not mad at the jocks. They were nerds who were beat up by jocks. No, they were radicalized white supremacists, sociopaths, psychopath. Dylan Klebold was a total psychopath. Or maybe it was Eric Harris, the ringleader. He was reading the Turner Diaries. And they want to, these are bloodthirsty people. You know, of course, this isn't every Republican, not all Republican, but I mean, I played earlier the women who were stood out in front, who were, just garden variety Looney Tune Republicans who were like, "There's no violence here. What? You're fake news." As an officer is bleeding internally from the bludgeoning he received from Trump supporters. And there were the more extremist elements among all these people. They give them cover. They gave them cover. And they just get to say, we were patriots just trying to help stop the steal. And among them are Nazis and fascists and neo-Confederates. And what's really interesting now is this idea of, calling people fascists. I've people told me, for years it was like, you can't just call, you can't keep calling this fascist because then you're just like, what is that going to do to the, to the real fascists, or what is that going to do to regular Republicans? You're going to alienate the regular, Republicans who support the Trump, who's, has built concentration camps on the border and openly attacks the press, all the fascist things, right? Well, guess what happened today, guys? There's been a lot of talk about Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, the senators who led this delegitimizing, challenge in the Senate that was, cut short by the MAGA mob over here. But listen to what Joe Biden says, and I have to say, a little surprised old Sleepy Joe said this. We'll give a listen.
If Senator Cruz or Senator Hawley resign?
I think they should be just flat beaten the next time they run. I think the American public has a real good, clear look at who they are.
I think he means beaten at the ballot box, not beaten literally. But listen to where he goes with this.
They're part of the big lie.
The big lie.
The big lie. I was being reminded by a friend of mine, and maybe you were with me, I can't recall, when we're told that, Goebbels and the great lie, you keep repeating the lie, repeating the lie.
He's talking about Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels, and Hitler referenced a big lie in Mein Kampf, and Goebbels talked about it as well, that you repeat a lie enough times that people just start believing it.
Well, there was a print that when Dresden was bombed, firebombed, there were 250 people that were killed, or was it 2,500 people were killed? And Goebbels said, no, 25,000 or 250,000 were killed. And
so Joe's old and he's having trouble struggling with it. But yeah, that's true. There was like 2,500 people killed at Dresden, the thermite firebombing of Dresden. And the Nazi propaganda machine put out lies that it was 2,500, 250,000 people, and spread that out across the world, and people still believe it to the day. I've run into people who think they're real smart contrarians, right or left, who just like, well, the United States, the Allies killed more people at Dresden than Hiroshima or Nagasaki or something like that. And it's Nazi propaganda. It's just been repeated so much that people still believe it to this day.
And our papers printed that. Our papers printed it. It's the big lie. People will know it's one thing for one man, one woman, to repeat the lie over and over and over again. By the way, Trump said that before he ran. If you say it enough, I'm going to convince you. I'll say it enough. The press is bad, the press is bad, the press is bad, the press is bad. If he's the only one saying it, that's one thing. But the acolytes that follow him, like Cruz and others, they are as responsible as he is. And so it's not about whether or not they get impeached. It's about whether or not they can continue to hold power because of the disgust the American people have for their actions.
I have to say, guys, like, I'm impressed by that. I did not, and this is the thing, in a lot of ways, Joe Biden is not prepared to handle this moment, right? But the president-elect of the United States, after a fascist uprising on the Capitol building, calling out sitting senators who enabled it and comparing them to Nazi propaganda ministers, I have to say, didn't expect that. Did not expect that from Joe Biden. So, you know, you got to take what you can get.